Federal Immigration Minister Mark Miller on the line. Talk about a story that is interesting because in the sense it now involves Quebec's newest immigration minister. This is now, of course, Jean-François Roberge's job, now that there's been a bit of a shuffle here. And the first thing that I guess is interesting in the story is the fact that a week or so ago, we were all caught a little bit off guard when Premier François Legault decided to, I don't know, bring up this idea that Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, the head of the PQ, talked to his buddy, his comrade, I think was how the Premier said it, in the Bloc Québécois, Yves-François Blanchet, and convince him that the government or that, that party should vote against the Liberals in a non-confidence motion. It came out of nowhere, and the Premier used the issue over immigration to basically frame that dispute he has. So now we find out that the Trudeau government yesterday responded to François Legault's call for the Bloc to trigger an election, basically, and kind of reached out. And Minister Miller, you were part of that, you along with Dominic LeBlanc, the public security minister, trying to address the situation. You said you wanted to set the record straight, right?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Aaron. We sent a letter that responded to Premier Legault's allegations that nothing had happened and since he had met the Prime Minister earlier on in the year, which was patently false. And obviously in the wake of his odd demand to get into the business of federal politics and demand an election, they didn't start from a position of strength. If today, had they gotten what they wanted, we'd all be in an election, and
right.
The government would be, for all intents and purposes, paralyzed for a few months to make demands about what's going to happen about the next 3 months. But we're all adults in the room, and we still have to get together and deal with the challenge of making sure asylum numbers come down. That we are working together on things that we agree on, and that's what we did last night. But it was important to set the record straight. We've done a lot of work in the last few months, including reimposition of the Mexican visa. The asylum claims are coming down at Trudeau Airport. The government got $750 million out of us, so it's hard to spit on that. Anyway, a whole bunch of things that set the record straight. It's important to be clear to Canadians, and that's what Dominic and I wanted to achieve.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say you were surprised to learn of the comments. I think we all were. They seemed to come out of left field. As you say, he used immigration to kind of rely on as a way to further this argument. By the way, I would also bring up the fact that, you mentioned $750, which is what the federal government, of course, gave to Quebec. But it seems like François Legault never got over the fact that he wanted $1 billion and you only gave him $750 million. Is that fair?
I'm not sure it does them any good to come out of these meetings not grumping at us and appearing to be upset.
Okay.
But I at the table, at least with his ministers, and I don't exclude my new colleague Jean-François from that, there's a different tone, and it is one where they want to get things done. And I sort of surprised the press gallery when we do our walk the gauntlet into caucus today by saying that it was productive. It was, and that Jean-François put forward the plan that Quebec has to reduce its numbers. For listeners, it's important to know that Quebec and Canada, since Robert Bourassa, have a particular accord that gives Quebec 50% of the power over temporary immigration and almost the balance of it over permanent immigration. So if there's a magic wand, they have half of it, but they need to use it and acknowledge that they have it. And I think that was an important discussion to have yesterday. And Mr. Roberge talked to us about his plan to reduce temporary immigration by 50% over a realistic period of time. And it's something that we're glad to work with him on. So, I did get the sense that there was something positive out of it, but again, the public-facing image of the CAQ government is different sometimes than what we see behind closed doors.
So I will point out, by the way, that one of the things you asked to do here is specifically have Quebec share with Ottawa the data necessary to identify asylum seekers, right, who could be settled outside of Quebec. But when Jean-François Roberge was asked about this whole idea of setting the record straight, here's what he had to say today.
If they want to set the record straight, let's do it. What have they done to cut the temporary immigrant here in Quebec by 50%? They didn't achieve this goal. They don't have any serious skittle about it. So it's up to them to move on. And this is what I said at the meeting last night. Okay, well, you said you made an error with immigration. We have too much immigration. Fine enough. What will you do to change it, to repair your mistake? And we still wait. We want some results, and we don't have any results.
Okay, he said he has no results. How accurate is that?
Well, it probably means he didn't read the letter. If you remember Mr. Legault's demand, he wanted, a 50% cut by Christmas, which would essentially mean evicting people. It was totally unrealistic and not based on any particular profound knowledge of how his own immigration system that he controls half of works. So yesterday we had a discussion about reality, and I think that was important. I've made a number of announcements about international students, about temporary foreign worker programs over the course of this year that will reduce the number of people in Canada, including Quebec, by a significant amount. We've said the objective, which is currently 7 to 5%, which can be done over a number of years. If visas are issued for a 2 or 3 year period, you could turn off the taps completely and only achieve a third over a year period. So it's just basic math that dictates that this has to be a reasonable time period without necessarily evicting anyone. We also talk about the numbers that are used. The StatsCan made a very important revision today to the number of asylum seekers that are alleged to be in Quebec, down from what was alleged to be 50% down to 40% because of the number of people that actually moved subsequently right off the airport into Ontario, principally Toronto. That revision is important because when you talk about the narrative, it's important to get it straight. It is still the case that when it comes to asylum seekers, which is a very significant subset of temporary people that are here temporarily, Quebec is still taking more than its fair share per population. So is Ontario, and there needs to be a plan to not only reduce those numbers as they come in, and I think we showed in the letter that we issued that we are taking those steps with additional visa restrictions, but also spreading them around the country in a fair way. And that's work that remains incomplete. It's work that we have to keep doing with provincial premiers. There's a number that are interested. There are some that have made this into a political show for their own leadership review or their own re-election. But again, I have to keep moving on and making sure that I'm working for Canadians to make sure people are getting a fair shake at things, and that includes my role as well and my responsibility in making sure we have an immigration system that's under control.
I would ask the question, you brought up this idea of spreading these people across the country, right? Because Quebec and Ontario have made the point that they're taking in an unfair number, and you just basically sort of reiterated that. How difficult, you mentioned some premiers are involved and want to do this and others aren't. I mean, how much provincial jurisdiction do they have as to who they can and who they can't, or who they will and who they won't allow to come from Quebec and Ontario into their provinces?
Well, it's an interesting question, and the answer isn't as easy as you might think. You could, since we share jurisdictions, obviously you would expect both levels of government to be dealing with people that are in most times a very precarious position in a very humane way. That means that the entity of government that has control over healthcare, over education if they have kids, over housing would do its fair share, obviously with federal compensation if and when need be. It'd be easy to ship people around the country and say, you're off on your own, figure it out, get a job. That isn't necessarily the best way to do things, nor the most efficient way to do things. And what we're asking our provincial colleagues to do is to do perhaps what they did with the Ukrainian resettlement, which is lift up their hands, say that they will take on a certain number of people that perhaps need housing, or match them with a set of jobs that are open and available. There are jobs open and available in Canada that asylum seekers can seek, and integrate them in the community while they wait their decision from the Immigration Refugee Review Board. That makes the system more efficient. But right now, sort of provinces are throwing up their hands and say, you federal government figure it out, and then if ever they find their ways into our jurisdiction, send us a check, which is not the right way to do things. It's not efficient. It ends up actually costing more money because we've tried that experiment over time with federally funded hotels. Just not the way to work. There are a couple provinces that want to do it, and I would say even the ones that have sort of made a big political hoopla about it for their own reasons have said that they might be able to do it with the money. So there's a different discussion at the negotiation table than in public, and it's important people see that.
If I can ask just as a final question, this idea that Quebec back and forth and back with the federal government over immigration, it seems like an issue that's never, ever going to go away. Are you more or less optimistic now? And maybe it's not fair to throw this at, Minister Roberge. He's new to the file. But do you ever think that, there will be a deal where both sides can look at this and go, okay, we're happy with what we have?
Well, look, call it a character flyer. And I actually like Jean-François. Personally, we get along. I don't like his politics. Bill 96, Bill 21. The view that his boss has on immigration. and the way he's weaponizing it. He can't come out of his winter caucus from the CAQ saying he wants to make it Justin Trudeau's number one problem and the ballot issue. But I have to work with these guys, and optimistic in the sense that I can have some good characters, that I can get some proper work done over the next year. I think we can, but I'm not naive enough to think that it will not continue to be weaponized politically for people's own sense of how they get elected or reelected, and how they think their own electorate reacts to immigration. I have a vision of Quebec that's inclusive. It includes immigration, it includes French as the common language, and sometimes I don't see that in the provincial government in the way it behaves, particularly towards newcomers to Quebec who are vulnerable, and we need to be able to help them. But we also need an immigration system that makes sense, and that's my job as well to get done.
Last thing I will ask you today, just separate from this, given the fact that today another non-confidence vote or motion raised by the Conservatives, how did it go in the House? Was there yelling and screaming today? I didn't catch it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of shenanigans over some stuff that were allegedly said by some Conservative members about this residence in New York City and Tom Clark and what appeared to be homophobic slurs. Irresponsible for Conservatives to do that. I didn't hear it. The Prime Minister heard it. That'll probably work its way out in the wash in the next few days. But so that I think everyone was heated about that back and forth from question period. It isn't the first confidence motion, Aaron. Well, probably won't be the last. But I think Pierre Poilievre has been quite clear that he's not. He's going to continue to question the confidence of this government.
Not giving up
our
any
job
time
is
soon.
to
Okay.
vote him down.
By the way, and I know this came up today, is the issue of proroguing being discussed?
Not at all. I haven't heard it discussed at all.
Okay. It seemed to me that if this is going to keep happening every other week or every other day, you think at some point maybe that would be something. It's happened before, obviously, right? It's happened under a Conservative government, so people are suggesting this might be the next move for the Prime Minister, but not being talked about.
Well, generally seen as anti-democratic. Democratic. It
Right.
has to be done for the right reasons, and people make a bunch of political hay out of it. But I haven't heard it talked about seriously in our group.
Minister, I thank you for your time. Always appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
You bet. Federal Immigration Minister Mark Miller on the back and forth and back with Quebec on immigration.